Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or wherever you are. A very warm welcome to today's joint workshop of the Bayreuth International Summer School and the Research Institute COCAT. My name is Professor Jessica Schmidt. I am the director of COCAT. I'm very honored and delighted to welcome today's distinguished speaker, Professor Jean du Plessis from Deakin University in Melbourne in Australia. Professor du Plessis has published extensively on company law and corporate governance, and he's also a regular speaker at very many international conferences. His presentation today tackles a very current and controversial topic: shareholder primacy versus employee democracy. Professor du Plessis asks the crucial question whether there is something fundamentally wrong with our corporate law and corporate governance model. I'm very excited to hear his presentation and especially to hear his answer to this very crucial question. So I now give the floor directly to Professor Jean du Plessis.
Thank you very much, Professor Schmidt. I really appreciate the introduction there. And as I mentioned to you, I think most people would know me. I've seen a few. I haven't seen all the individuals attending, but I see some of my friends from South Africa there, and also some of my colleagues here, as well as the students that you invited. I really look forward to this presentation for many reasons. The first of all is that I'm very, very excited about the recent developments. And everybody knowing me would know I'm very enthusiastic generally about this topic. And I have a lot of energy that I've put into it, and I generate a lot of energy to get my messages across. And I hope that I could achieve that tonight, and hope that that you will enjoy the presentation. I have decided not to make it a formal presentation in the sense of standing in front of a lectern and lecturing to you. I would rather like to put it very generally what the problems are, but by way of illustrations, and all of you knowing me would know it's one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and that is to make sure that people do find it interesting when I present a lecture. So please sit back, relax. It's evening here, so my colleagues in Australia, I wouldn't mind if you have something to drink, whatever your choice of drink is, soft drink or probably something else. But you can also interrupt me anytime. I've agreed with Professor Schmidt that whenever you've got a question, just put up your hand. There's the little icon there. And then she would allow you to unmute, and you can just ask me the question. So interrupt me anytime. You will get the PowerPoint slides by way of a PDF version. I think the hyperlinks will be active in the PDF, so don't worry about making too much or too many notes. The workshop is also recorded, and Professor Schmidt will allow you to, or send the link to you. And then what I have discovered, what's quite useful if you want to have an immediate reference to what I'm saying, just use the snippet or any other form, depending on whether you're an Apple user or PC user, and just make a screenshot of it for your own records. I normally make a screenshot and then immediately save it in a Word document or put it into a Word document just for immediate reference before the recorded lecture comes out. What I really want to do is I really do not want to tonight to give you a fish. And I know that you all know that where to fish and how to fish. So I would rather like to take you through a process of these specific areas which I think are important, and where you could fish to find your meals for future purposes. So I would like to give a small general warning to you. You would know, or may know, if you're a fisherman. I am. I've been fishing a lot in Namibia, I'm really, all my thoughts are with the people really suffering in Namibia at the moment with COVID-19. All my friends, I grew up there. It's just letting me know the hospitals are full. People are waiting in cars outside the hospitals, and I really, my thoughts are with all of them. But I've been fishing there, and I know it's very important that you find the right places to fish. You may know how to fish, but you need to find the right places. But yeah, I just want to make a note and tell you that fishing can be dangerous. And I thought I'll just share a very short video with you, just about 30 seconds, of all the dangers associated with fishing at times. So just sit back and just enjoy. I really think this is very funny, and hopefully you will also enjoy it. So hopefully you could also hear the sound in a second. Maybe you've seen this video before. I hope it's working.
Vou fazer o meu ranchinho na beira do rio só pra mim pescar, pra fugir do barulhão da cidade grande, pra não estressar. Lá eu fico amoitado, jogo farelinho pra cevar o poço. Até esqueço que no banco eu tô atolado até o pescoço. Ai, como é difícil a vida do pescador. De noite ele rosca o anzor na gaiada da taboca. De dia ele queima no sol.
All right, I think that's enough of that. Otherwise, we won't be able. If I played further, I just can't stop laughing whenever I look at that fishing video. But I think you will get the idea. The point is, be careful. You can get at areas where it's quite dangerous to fish. And when you fish the waters of corporate governance, please be careful. That's all that I want to say. You need to know where to fish and then be careful. I really hope that you would be able to see the seriousness of the topic that I'm going to deal with tonight, even though I present it in a very general pictorial way, and I really want it to be entertaining for you as well. So please think about the deeper meanings. It's not going to be your traditional, I know especially some of my German colleagues are very formal in their presentations. I'm not like that. So let me start off, and I'm going, if you don't mind, to switch off my camera now, if I can, because I'm going to move between two screens. I will switch on the camera again at the end. So you would know how important the limited liability company is for modern purposes. And I've given you this quote on several occasions, but just want to share it once again. I mean, this is something that, I mean, everybody who's taken corporate law and the company law would know that what Nicholas Murray Butler said, that I weigh my words when I say that in my judgment, the limited liability corporation is the greatest single discovery of modern times. And then he puts it in context by referring to the social context, the ethical context, the industrial development that all happened through corporations. And then quite an influential professor of corporate law in Cambridge, Professor Len Seeley, said that if you start to think about what Butler said, you may think this is an exaggeration, but the claim is in actual fact one that can be substantiated. It's indeed the corporation or the limited liability through which a lot of developments took place in the world. You would know it started off with railways, with waterworks, and thereafter many other developments in the entire world. So it is incredibly significant, the limited liability company. So it's absolutely fundamentally important that we are all involved and interested in this area, and that we have got a responsibility to make sure that corporations act in a responsible way. Now, I'm not going to give you a lecture in history, but if you really want to put a corporate law in broad historic terms, you will go back to the bursting of the bubble in 1720. And then joint stock companies were, after the bursting of the bubble, basically banned because nobody would incorporate or ask for a charter to be incorporated because they were too worried about liability. And the reputation of the joint stock company suffered tremendously. And then after the repeal of the Bubble Act in 1825, until 1843, there were several very significant reports, and I would suggest I've dealt with all of them in some of my articles, that if you are interested in the history, that you study some of the reports, Belend and Kerr, and several other reports where they've discussed the law of partnership and the joint stock company in detail. And it was just not a clear-cut case that the company would become the normal form of business. They considered the partnership uncommandite, but eventually they passed the UK Joint Stock Companies Act of 1844, which was sort of the first act under which you could incorporate. And then you got the advantages of incorporation, but not the advantage of limited liability. That privilege of limited liability of the shareholders only came in 1855. So I thought of just making it interesting by comparing it with the development of a butterfly, the first stage, the egg stage, then the caterpillar stage, and that would be considered to be 1600 till 1720, where it's really been developed. You would know in 1600, the large and very influential company, Verenigd Oost-Indies Company, was incorporated and played a major role. And then the bursting of the bubble, and then the cocoon stage, and then the developments that I've mentioned, and then it got its wings with the introduction of limited liability. And I want you to think back about this moment because it is significant from a UK perspective, and I think probably in most instances, in most other countries as well. Before 1855, the basic rule was shareholders were liable to an unlimited extent for all the debts of the corporation. So you couldn't really hide from the creditors if things went wrong. It made you a more responsible shareholder, probably. You really did take care and interest in the corporation because you could be held liable to an unlimited extent. But since the limited liability came in, as you and the investors became just investors, no more real corporate governance interest, and the life of the company is very much associated with that of human beings. If I go to the right-hand side here, after you go through the basic stages, this would probably insolvency or what we called voluntary administration stages. The company can get back to ordinary trading corporations, but if the company cannot make it, then rest in peace, it would be deregistered. But it's very similar to what the lifespan of human beings are. Let me just spend a few minutes on the American take on this creature of statute with perpetual succession. You would know the shareholders will vary, the directors will vary, the company will continue to be a corporation or company perpetually until it's deregistered if things go wrong. But in the case, a very important case, which is still relevant, it's still American law, whether you believe it or not, whether you make excuses and say, well, shareholders can, or directors or executives can take into consideration other interests. Yes, they can. There's no doubt about that. But whether they can be forced to do that is a completely different question, because in the case, it was said that a business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. The powers of the directors are to be employed for that end. So Burley and Means and Dodd's era in the early 1930s discussed all the issues regarding corporate social responsibility. I really find it sort of almost shocking that people think that this debate, shareholder, stakeholder debate, that it's unique. All of these things, if you read these basic articles, were discussed in great detail in the early 1930s. And then you would know the conclusion. Eventually, Dodd gave in and said, well, we know that the corporation cannot really be looking, or the executives, to all the interests. You cannot serve more than one master. And then in the 1970s, in particular, this very influential New York Times Magazine article by Milton Friedman, where he made statements, and I really would like to suggest that you read the entire piece. I must make a confession here, I've never read the entire piece until last week. So I've always relied on the basic idea. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. That was it, but I didn't read the entire article. But I was really shocked when I read the entire piece because of some of the statements that he made in it. He said businessmen who speak eloquently about the social responsibilities of business in a free enterprise system believe that they are defending free enterprise when they declaim or profess that business is not concerned merely with profit, but also with promoting desirable social ends, that business has a social conscience, and now I've emphasized, and takes seriously its responsibilities for providing employment, eliminating discrimination, avoiding pollution, and whatever else may be the catchword of the contemporary crop of reformers. So nonsense for the reformers to really pay attention to these things. They are irrelevant. Profits is the only thing. In fact, they are, or would be if they are anyone, if they or anyone else took them seriously, preaching pure and unadulterated socialism. Businessmen who talk this way are unwitting puppets of the intellectual forces that have been undermining the basis of a free society these past decades. Now, I think if you think about this in the current context, you would already know where I'm steering to. So you also mentioned a few other very interesting aspects in that piece. In a free enterprise private property system, a corporate executive is an employee of the owners of the business. Wow, that's not the case in Australia, in the UK, and I think not even in the US any longer. He has direct responsibility to his employers. That responsibility is to conduct the business in accordance with their desire, which generally, emphasize on generally, will be to make as much money as possible while conforming to their basic, emphasis on basic, rules of the society, both these embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. Now, I want you just to keep in mind, because I'm coming back to this, to keep in mind another very significant thing that Milton Friedman said. He said in his book, Capitalism and Freedom, only a crisis, focus on the crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. Now, I want you to keep that into consideration, and just probably in context with the current crisis that we have, COVID-19. So shareholders as owners of the corporation, shareholders, shareholder primacy, and the sole purpose of the corporation is profit maximization for its shareholders. That's all very, very, very much part of the DNA of the American model. And let me not make or give my game away here. I will tell you later on why I think it hasn't changed. But I really do want you to listen. It's only 2 minutes, but I really do want you to listen once again to this absolutely unique part from the Wall Street.
Of evolution in corporate America seems to be Survival of the unfit.
Sorry, I'll just go back if you don't mind. So this is Michael Douglas in Wall Street.
The new law of evolution in corporate America seems to be survival of the unfittest. Well, in my book, you either do it right or you get eliminated. In the last 7 deals that I've been involved with, there were 2.5 million stockholders who have made a pre-tax profit of $12 billion. Thank you. I am not a destroyer of companies. I am a liberator of them. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
All right, I'll just stop the presentation. Sorry for the music. I just need to go to my program to close that particular one. Otherwise, we will hear the music the whole evening. All right, there you are. So now I will go back to my presentation, if I can get there. Okay, so I really think that you should appreciate that it is still very much, I'll change the screen, yeah, I apologize, some things will not always go right here. So I really think that even though you may disagree with me, I would still think that you should appreciate that it's very much part of the American DNA, profit maximization. And if you don't believe me and you think that the Dodge and Ford case has got no significance, please read that very interesting article by David Yoshifon, who illustrates very clearly that that principle, Dodge and Ford, that was in a small jurisdiction, Michigan, was in actual fact adopted throughout many of the other states and also is very deeply embedded in Delaware. So do not tell me generally that there's no legal basis for greed to be good. My son helped me to transcribe this, and I highlighted the point where he makes were 2.5 million for stockholders who have made a pre-tax profits of 12 billion. Can you see the focus on stockholders? I just wanted to make the point here that also in recent times, it's still very well known that the greed is enough concept is not something that's just disappeared. It's still something that's very much in the background of the minds of many investors. And I'll illustrate to you what could be done or should be done, but it's still a very important aspect of the American model and probably in many other countries. So I mentioned to you that 1855, the abbreviations limited, PTY limited, were added as a red flag to make sure that people realize how dangerous this beast is. But it quickly turned into a pot of gold for primarily the shareholders. They have started to really, since the Milton Friedman and his influential article, they have in actual fact really make use properly of the corporation as a cash cow. And the unfortunate thing is that you would know that unfortunately many people, employees in particular, started to be caged by this massively influential institution. So the ugly side of the corporation as a separate legal entity, and I want to make very, very clear here that I'm not saying that the limited liability company as such is bad. This is incredibly important. I think I was misunderstood in my previous presentation that I have got something against a limited liability company as such. No, I do not. I am in absolutely, I love the limited liability corporation and company. I really think that it is indeed one of the greatest inventions in the world. But there's no denying that really it caused a lot of suffering. All these links are hyperlinks, and I would very much like you, if you haven't done it, to just make sure that you appreciate what's being done through corporations. I'm not saying it's limited liability as such, it's the people who started to use and abuse and misuse the limited liability corporation because they could do so. They were not prohibited to do so. It's not been illegal to be greedy. It has not been illegal in 1970 to pollute the environment, to not treat your employees well, as long as you made profits. That was the culture of the time, and that started to be abused considerably over time. So please, it is still, I have said now, one of the greatest single discoveries of modern times, but I started to think, what is greater? Which other invention is in actual fact greater? Would there be new COVID vaccines without corporations making them? So it still remains very important. The problem, however, is that the Burley and Means shareholder primacy model that they promoted very actively, that the shareholders or stockholders are the owners and that shareholders are everything, stockholders, and the unashamedly greed-inspired Milton Friedman form of capitalism and profit maximization for shareholders, they were promoted as two of the glittering diamonds in the limited liability company's crown. And that has been abused and misused. So let's unpack some of the fundamental problems. And one of the problems is the profit trickle down effect fundamentally changed since the 1970s. And what I mean by this will become clear with the next, by me showing you the next few slides. It is the amount of profits that the company made in the 70s that trickled down to the corporation and to other stakeholders. That changed fundamentally since the 1970s, and it's currently a huge problem. And I just want to sort of show you some of the problems here. I really do like this quite recent book. It's not absolutely academic, although Kurt Anderson did write some very solid academic book, but it gives you a very good summary of the various stages of development. And we are currently in the COVID-19 era, and some uncertainties associated with the model that's been promoted so actively in the 1970s. So what are the serious concerns? And I would suggest that there are three areas in particular that's of really great concern for us at the moment, and it will probably remain concerns. Excessive executive and director remuneration. I personally don't think that's the biggest problem. I think the two bigger problems is the absolute generous dividends that shareholders get nowadays. I think the other very big problem is the amounts of profits or tax savings, as it is called, that's going into share buybacks, and I'll give you some statistics on that as well. But let me first of all start with the widening gap between the remuneration and compensation of executives in comparison with ordinary employees. And you can see the curve there, the blue one just went up for the CEOs and executives. The share prices did rise, but not proportionally with the executive remuneration. And the ordinary employee remuneration stayed sort of flat. And I've got the statistics till 2002, but that trend did not stop in 2002. The more recent statistics are that CEOs in particular earn 312 times more than ordinary employees. Is that right? Is that justifiable? Some may say yes, they work 312 times harder. The employees do not really make any real contribution to the profits of the corporation. It's just the money that the shareholders put into the corporation. They speculate with it and, well, they take all the risks. Is that really true? But let's think about that. And then I do have some very recent statistics, 2019 statistics, that just show the really almost upsetting state of affairs at the moment. While wages for the bottom half of income earners have stagnated, crawling up by only $200, the top 1% has seen its average income to rise from $428,000 in 1980 to 1.3 million. And I'm not going to read the whole thing now. Take a screenshot and you will find the references there. So Andy Haldane, the then chief economist of the Bank of England, pointed out in 2015, if you compare 1970 with 2015, that the amount of profits that went to shareholders in 1970, that was roughly 10%. 90% was reinvested or retained profits that went into the corporation for redevelopment, for expansions. In 2015, that changed to 65%. So I've just made a rough estimate. I haven't got the exact statistics for the UK. It would probably be slightly lower than 75% and slightly bigger than 25% at the moment. And I say that because of actual statistics from the US. Just have a look at this graph. So the pink there is the capital expenditure that you have in a company. It rise quite a bit. But look at the buyback, share buybacks. It started moderately and then went up to exceed the capital expenditure. And then consistently, it started to exceed it until, well, 2019 roughly. But look at how the buybacks, the number or the amounts of profits that's been spent on buybacks that sort of rise, and then just look at the dividends. So a disproportionate amount of profits not going to the corporation and other stakeholders, but to the shareholders. And here's just another illustration of this trend. I really would like to suggest that you have a look at this particular explanation by Desjardins in the Visual Capitalist. I always find it very interesting. The reason why I find this particular one very good, it provides a comparison with the positive and negative aspects of share buybacks. And you can make up your own mind whether this is justifiable, what goes into share buybacks. The actual figures of what is in actual fact going back into the pockets of the shareholders has been analyzed in detail by, well, you may say the socialists. I can't think the socialists can really argue or can manipulate the numbers completely. So just look at the amount of distributions of tax savings to shareholders, 61%, job creation, 20%, and just look how it goes down and down. And I've just asked my son to convert this morning to just a pie chart. Does something just not seem right? And in particular, if you compare this with the 1970s, where this blue here would probably have represented what went back into the corporation or into all the other areas. I have had two absolutely fantastic research assistants that assisted me. In actual fact, there were three research assistants that I wouldn't mention them. I know at least two of them would probably attend this one, who assisted me to have a look at the 2018 to 2019 amounts that went into remuneration of executives, dividends and share buybacks in Australia. So, and there you can have an idea. The amounts of dividends, the blue, remuneration, there it sits of executives. So is that the biggest problem? And then share buybacks, that's the amount. And I have seen many politicians struggling if you give the numbers just in figures. So I've written out the numbers here. You start off with directors' remuneration in the millions, then you go to the billions in share buybacks, and then into the trillions. I'm not going to try and pronounce or say the words, but it's absolutely staggering, the amounts that's going up. Are you surprised that the employees are up in arms? COVID-19 now, employees being sacked left, right, and center, and 61% of company profits over a number of years went back to shareholders. No reserve funds, no provision for looking after employees, just widening the gap between the rich and the poor. To use the word rich is controversial, I know, because if you really think who's really rich and who's really poor, I feel very guilty at times when I think about that actual difference between rich and poor, because I would be considered to be very, very rich in comparison with probably 70% of the world. But then there's the ultimate 1% that is considered to be the super rich. Now, the share buybacks also became a huge issue and concern in the UK, and this is also hyperlinked. And I would really like to suggest that you have a look at this quite recent report. The concern has been expressed, and I find this report quite objective. It's just not rejecting share buybacks as just totally irrelevant. It's a very academic and well-argued case, whether there are advantages or not regarding share buybacks, and what are the main purposes of share buybacks. And you will see if you read it, they don't conclude that it is necessarily completely wrong. But if you look at the figures, I think you read between the lines that there might be a problem. In any typical year over the period 2007 to 2017, aggregate share repurchase in the UK totaled between 15 billion and 20 billion, and they were concentrated in relatively small number. And then you can go down and down, and you can just see that if you add things up, you see that a very large percentage of company profits that go into share buybacks. Share repurchase, I read from paragraph 2, activity is both limited and cyclical, responding to economic conditions and market confidence. Since the global financial crisis, share repurchase activity in the UK has stabilized at around 10% of operating profits for those firms undertaking share repurchases. This is significantly lower than the amount of dividends paid. So if you put the two together, you realize once again the problem, which is around 40% of the operating profits. So shareholders still grabbing in the vicinity of 50% of the operating profits in a corporation. Is that right? If you think about COVID-19 and you start to think about employees in particular, can you justify that? And will we have to do something about it? Now, this article by William Lazonick in the Harvard Business Review was really, in my view, one of the first really quite significant academic analyses of what the problem with share buybacks, what it could be the biggest problem. Profits without prosperity. And I would really like to suggest that you have a proper read at this article, because it did in actual fact reveal some of the serious problems that started to exist regarding share buybacks in America. And you will note that the article was published in 2014, and Larry Fink in the same year then also made an announcement to warn CEOs that you need to be careful about share buybacks. It seems to be a little bit excessive. I'll come to it in a minute. The problem is that corporate profitability is not translating into economic prosperity in the United States. Instead of investing profits in innovation and productive capabilities, US executives are spending them on gigantic stock repurchases and paying shareholders generous dividends. And then I've referred to the 2014 letter to the CEOs by Larry Fink. I'll come to some of his later letters. And in this particular letter, he really did warn the shareholders that they need to be careful about the amounts that they spend on share buybacks. He was just concerned that it's reached a stage where it's excessive. And then in another quite respectful journal, Boston Review, Robert Homan also pointed out to the problem. This distribution is a trickle up. This is what I mentioned with my main heading, not a trickle down. The resulting concentration of capital at the top results in even more money being made for people who do not have to perform labor to watch it grow. This is the root mechanism by which corporations like Apple contribute to an increasingly unequal society. Our shareholder-obsessed corporations are not inevitable. They are maintained by the powerful who have a direct stake in their existence. And then please have and read Evil Geniuses by Kurt Andersen, and you will see what is meant by who's controlling almost everything. I find this general, not academically orientated article interesting just for the statistics. What happened in the case of Intel and TSMC, 84.5 billion spent on share buybacks, and then no really money to invest in basic chips for the industry. This is shocking, but it could easily be justified because it could be done. It's not illegal. Where will we end up if nothing is done now? Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. People may think that I am only having a go at the shareholders as such. That's not really true. I really appreciate the importance of shareholders. I appreciate that we have had a lot of very sensible and responsible investments over many years. But if I look at the statistics and the figures in totality, there's a lot of irresponsible and greediness also. And that's what I've got against it. There's a huge discrepancy in why and how company profits are really distributed. I'm not a socialist, I assure you. I call myself a realistic capitalist, and you'll see I've got a particular model of corporate law and corporate governance that I will show to you at the end. But really something is wrong and we need to do something about it. And all the research that I've done indicates that the biggest problem is in actual fact the shareholder primacy model. Greed is good aspect, and the fact that we have believed in the past that the executives are in actual fact employed by the stakeholders, that we have believed that you cannot serve more than one master, that it's impossible to judge and consider and weigh up various interests. That is nonsense. You can. We do it every single day. It's more difficult to do it, to consider the interests of other stakeholders, but that's why executives are paid a lot of money. And if you apply the correct theoretical model that I'll illustrate to you later, I don't think it's impossible. It's more difficult, but it's not impossible. Three initiatives that I think has been quite prominent in recent times are the investor-driven initiative by the American Business Roundtable, the British Academy initiative to redefine the purpose of the corporation, and the accounting-driven initiative to make reporting on non-financial issues relevant, reliable, and material. And let me quickly take you through these initiatives. I want to emphasize once again that these are just initiatives. It has not, as far as I could discover, changed the legal basis of the shareholder primacy model in any jurisdiction that did rely on that shareholder primacy model so far. And when I say not any jurisdiction that I am aware of, I'm not aware of any changes in the US. I'm not aware of any fundamental changes in the UK. I'm not aware of any fundamental changes in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Hong Kong, and New Zealand. And I'm reasonably convinced not in Germany or other models that still rely on the shareholder primacy model. So it's just initiatives, these things. So the initiative started with Larry Fink sending out the letters in 2018. I mentioned the 2014 letter, and warning the CEOs of the companies in which they invest to start and do something about the problems that he foresee in corporations. And that is that they cannot just focus after his 2014 letter on enriching the shareholders and buy back shares. And I think if you read between the lines, other problems associated with shareholder wealth as well, but that they should start to focus on long-term growth and value creation, not only for the shareholders, but focus on other stakeholders as well. And then far more specifically, he started to mention environment, the workforce. Are we adapting to technology changes? Employees, workers. I mean, this is so far removed from the 1970 message of Milton Friedman. It's so far removed from the legal basis that it's beyond belief. And then once again in 2019, he sent out a letter and say, well, now we need to focus on delivering value to our customers, the employees, the suppliers, the shareholders. And I have added in yellow, of course, that's important. The customers generate business and allow for profit making. The employees who manufacture the goods and provide services to the company, the suppliers who supply goods and services to the company. The communities in which we work and can severely be impacted by the companies, and of course the shareholders who provide the capital that allows companies to invest and grow. In 2019, once again, he sent out a letter to the CEOs, and this is significant as a practical way of dealing with the problem. I say only a practical way, because there's a lot of skepticism about these moves. The skepticism centers around the fact, is this just window dressing again? Many CEOs in the past said, we are absolutely looking after the interests of all our stakeholders. They've completed hundreds of surveys. What's important to you? Only the shareholders or also other stakeholders? And they would say almost 99%, well, I'm exaggerating, at least 70 or 80% would say, yeah, of course we look after and we take the interests of other stakeholders into consideration as well. But do they really do that? Where's the money in the reserve funds for the employees that could have helped them through the difficult times during COVID-19 from the beginning of, or from 2019. So he started to say, we really are not going to invest in your companies with billions of US dollars that he can invest if you don't listen to us. So no legal basis on which he asked them to do that, just nicely. Well, the way in which he worded it is probably not that nicely put, but he told them, listen, we won't invest in you if you not start to become really responsible. And then for the same reasons, because of the crisis and the dilemma and the almost embarrassment for economies and the capitalistic model, also in the UK, they started to focus on the future of the corporation and in particular on the purpose of the corporation to redefine it. So I really sort of like the paragraph here. Now in 2020, we are all living through a crisis. Remember the crisis that Milton Friedman mentioned? Few could have anticipated the COVID-19 pandemic has exaggerated the fault lines across society. Business is no exception, and the crisis is shining new light on the issues that have been driving the shift to purposeful business in recent years. It's not COVID. The problems didn't only existed because of in 2019. It existed long before 2019. So there's sort of an admittance that in the past, the aims of corporations were purposeless. But I'm putting words in the mouth of the British Academy there. It's just tongue in cheek, let me put it on record. So some fundamental cracks were very, very clearly revealed in quite an influential, I think, piece by the former Chief Justice of Delaware, Leo Strine, and Dorothy Lund, a professor, how to restore strength and fairness to our economy. And once again, just take a screenshot. The underlining message here is the shareholders, through dividend payments and share buybacks, were too dominant. So if you did not believe what I have said before regarding dividends or share buybacks, if you think I exaggerated the problem, then at least I don't think that you will really argue with a person like Leo Strine and a very highly regarded Professor Lund that there is a problem, and the problem is in actual fact one that relates to dividend payments and share buybacks. So the last paragraph there, at the same time American corporations weakened the traditional gain sharing between the workforce and stockholders that characterized the post-era World War II era. During that period, when corporate profits went up, workers shared equally in the gains. No, not anymore. So there's indeed quite a problem, and I think just through the titles of some of the articles or pieces here, not all of them are academic, sensationalized in some instances. But if you get a person like the person in charge of the British Academy project, The Future of the Corporation, and Leo Strine and Jaap Winter, three absolutely highly regarded academics and practitioners. Jaap is a practitioner as well. And of course, you would know the background of the former Chief Justice Strine. And they say that 50 years later, Milton Friedman's shareholder doctrine is dead. And please have a look at that article. I find it quite interesting. I do not necessarily agree with some of their solutions. They start to talk about moving corporations primarily to benefit corporations. All corporations should be forced to become benefit corporations. I really think that's not the solution. It's once again, what will you never have any for-profit corporations as well? I don't think that's the solution. The solution is to deal with a corporation as a separate legal entity and work with the various interests, and directors and executives should weigh the interests of the various stakeholders, including the stakeholders, as long as it is in the best interest of the corporation. But I do not necessarily agree with the way in which they explain what the solution would be. But of course, they are so high profile that who am I as a very ordinary professor here down under to even dare criticizing their solutions. Andrew Sorkin, I do not know the person, but I've come across some very significant articles that he, or pieces that he wrote in the New York Times, and I would like you to have a look at it. And then, of course, if I mention the name Lynn Stout, all of you knowing the importance of the stakeholder debate and her incredible influential contribution to that, would know that she promoted very strongly the stakeholder orientated approach to corporate law and corporate governance. A good friend of mine, Professor Mervyn King, he has got quite a lot to say about the term stakeholder capitalism. He's not in favor of that term because he is clearly of the opinion if you make all stakeholders equal, then there could be problems, but they don't need to be equal if you consider only the best interest of the corporation. One stakeholder's interest could be dominant at a particular moment in time, and then others could also become dominant at a later time. But just have a look at the articles. Thomas Clark is quite an influential academic here in Australia. The Contest on Corporate Purpose, why Lynn Stout was right and Milton Friedman was wrong. Jean-Philippe Roubaix, The Shareholder Value Mess and How to Clean It Up. Please have a look at all the other papers in that tribute to Lynn Stout, who passed away 2 or 3 years ago. And then once again, quite an interesting piece by Sorkin, a free market manifesto that changed the world, reconsidered, and basically the same article, but just in a different format. Greed is good, except when it's bad. Please do a screenshot and eventually have a look at these articles. I think that you will find quite interesting and quite unique pieces of information in there. So if you're fishing in that area, you may find some interesting fishes that you can get out of the corporate governance waters in these articles. If you are interested in making a comparison between the shareholder-focused and the stakeholder-focused model of corporate governance. I find this to be quite ironic. So was it the COVID-19 crisis that broke the back of the Milton Friedman capitalist, or the camel's back, the capitalistic one of Milton Friedman? I think the answer to that is probably yes. So he mentioned only a crisis, actually, or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. So the crisis that he mentioned happened, and now we are working with the ideas that are lying around. And these ideas are most definitely, in my view, not the ideas that he promoted in 1970. This article is probably one of the most fundamental and academically justifiable and well-grounded articles to justify the move away from a stakeholder or shareholder-orientated model only. And I really would like you to have a look at it. What is fascinating about the article, that it was written originally, it was delivered as a paper before the COVID-19 crisis. And the insights of the former Chief Justice of Delaware, Lewis Strine, is just amazing. He, before there was a crisis, the COVID-19, already pointed out to all the problems. The COVID-19 crisis just sped up the necessity to address the fundamental problems that's been created by the Milton Friedman orientated model. And we are in that era at the moment. We all, and I really mean we all, need to think about this very, very hard and very carefully. If we, and by we I say some of the older generation, and I classify myself now as part of the older generation, but the younger generation, the students that's sitting here listening to this, my son is 31 years old and he thinks very differently about environmental issues, and he convinced me to be different. And you need to find solutions. You need to work very actively in finding proper academic foundations and solutions with the help of what we old guys did in the past, but take it one step further and think about what the solutions are. It may seem simple, but it is a massively complex area. I'm the first one to admit that really you cannot just with one particular stroke of the pen get rid of shareholder primacy and get rid of all the deeply embedded consequences of the current capitalistic model, but we need to work on possible solutions. A future focus on all-inclusive shareholder approach is in my view, absolutely essential. And I want to refer you once again to that article, even though I do not agree with the particular assess or their solutions going to the benefit corporation. I really think when the moment that the benefit corporation was introduced in the US, I once again thought this was just a distraction from the real problem. So the argument was, listen, leave us alone as capitalists, as entrepreneurs. We will make profit. We will follow the Milton Friedman model. If you don't like what we are doing, you can always form a benefit corporation. Go and use your good intentions of social responsibility in a different form, but leave us executives alone. I don't know, many of you will not know the song Brick in the Wall in the past, Leave Us Kids Alone. And I really like that song, especially if you replace it, Leave Us Executives Alone. You just do your own thing. Don't bother with us. Leave us executives alone. We will do our own thing. We will keep on making money and we will make more and more money. And that would be in the best interest of the society. And I'm very much against that particular approach. So now we have moved and we are moving more and more towards a more legalistic approach to have consequences for directors not adhering to what I have always called their corporate social responsibility duties. So in this very recent report, Commonwealth Climate Change Initiative, Primer on Climate Change, Directors' Duties and Disclosure Obligations, you now have the first very clear indication that there will be legal consequences for directors if they start to ignore some of these, what in the past were called corporate social responsibilities. Well, pollution that Milton Friedman mentioned is but one example. We don't even argue about this any longer, that you cannot just destroy the planet. But there are many other social responsibilities that I think there's a duty that directors have. And in Australia, if the community expectations are that a particular duty should be recognized, then it's expected of the courts, if there are cases, and the Australian law is slightly different, our regulator has got standing to bring cases of this nature, then the judges and the courts must recognize the significance of a corporate social responsibilities that corporations have, and that translates to a duty to the directors. And I'm not trying to blow my own horn here, but please have a look at two articles that I've published reasonably recently. I argued that there must be a duty for directors to act in the best interest of the corporation. And that means not as it is currently interpreted in Australia, the best interest of the shareholders as a whole. I attack that particular proposition and the cases where in the UK and in Australia, it has been said that the meaning of the best interest of the corporation means the best interest of the shareholders as a whole, or shareholders current and future. I think that's fundamentally wrong. There's no legal justification for that interpretation. The best interest of the corporation can only mean the best interest of the corporation as a separate legal entity, legally formed under our Corporations Act, under the Corporations Act or the Companies Act in the UK and in the US, but let's not get into all the jurisdictions. And then please, both of these articles received quite a bit of comments and critical comments. I adjusted my views, but my core message in both of them were, or I think hopefully clear, that we cannot adopt and accept just what's been decided in the past, that we need to move forward. And I'm incredibly pleased that this is sort of the movement or the direction in which we are moving to now, that there is in actual fact now more attention paid to the actual legal basis of holding directors liable. Now, eventually the shareholders can still escape liability. The limited liability protection for them is still there, but at least directors will be far more sensitive towards corporate social responsibilities. And they may very well resist pressure from shareholders to do share buybacks, to pay massive dividends, if they know by doing that they are neglecting some of their other, and I want to call it corporate social responsibilities. Please allow me to make one point here, because this is a point that's been made on several occasions when I argued for the duty of a corporate social responsibility duty of directors. People tell me, and probably some of you would have said, what's meant? It's such a vague concept. What do you understand under corporate social responsibility? What do you understand? It's so vague. How can you make it a duty? And I just want to answer that by pointing out one significant aspect. And I wish that you could give me an answer and give me a counter argument against this. When we started 200 years ago in the UK corporate law and in the UK corporate governance environment, or even in the US environment, when we started to refer to a director's duty to act with due care and diligence, or when we started to refer to a director's duty to act with due care, diligence, and skill, did we know exactly what it meant then? Do we know currently exactly what it means? When we started a long time ago to refer to directors' duty to act in the best interest of the corporation, did we know what it meant then? I point out in my article that we still don't really know what it means. So the point that I would like to make is, if we start to recognize that the community expects of directors to have a corporate social responsibility, and that responsibility is currently vaguely defined, it provides no reason whatsoever not to recognize that duty and let that duty develop over time as the duty of care and diligence and the duty to act in the best interest of the corporation developed over time. And you will never have exact certainty on any of these vague terms. Corporate social responsibility duty, best interest of the corporation duty, or directors' duty of care and diligence. But do not use the argument that corporate social responsibility is vague as a reason not to start to deal with the actual problem that we have at the moment, and that there is such a community expectation that directors must look at the social responsibilities of corporations. In summary, on this part, and I know we haven't got a lot of time left, but I want to have 15 minutes for questions and debates. I think you will know from what I've said so far that I am of the opinion that it is beyond dispute that the shareholder-centric corporate law model created enormous prosperity and wealth for some countries and some individuals. But at the same time, this model caused immeasurable harm to the environment, many human beings, most societies, and many other creatures, not only humans, currently stuck on this planet Earth. Perhaps if we start to move to other planets on a regular basis and to the moon, I know the first moon flight, it was supposed to be today, I think, commercial one. We need to look after planet Earth at the moment until we can go to the moon or other planets on a regular basis. So what should be or could be done to address the problem? Now, this is the million-dollar question, and I can now tell you without any hesitation that I haven't got all the answers at all, not at all. But what I do know is that we need not only broad initiatives away from the shareholder primacy, we need a legal shift from shareholder primacy to an all-inclusive stakeholder approach. And as I said, I disagree with Strine and Meyer and Winter on what their solution is, the benefit corporation. I think the solution is, I will show you, in recognizing the corporation as a separate legal entity in which various interests are represented. So one of the initiatives, or a final initiative that's quite important also dealing with the solution, is the accounting-driven initiative to make reporting on non-financial issues relevant, reliable, and material. And as you have seen from the report, now in future, there's an absolute real possibility that directors will also be liable if they do not report correctly and diligently on their impact on the environment. There's been an opinion here in Australia that circulated about 3 years ago, and it's been refined, and it made the point very clearly that it's just a matter of time that directors are held liable, not under breaches of statutory provisions, but that the directors are held liable under more general duties for not paying attention to environmental issues. And this is now becoming a real issue at the moment. The problem that you have with the reporting of non-financial information is that it has got no legal basis in most jurisdictions. Yes, I know there's been a lot of developments in the European Union, and I really apologize for not paying more attention to the very fascinating and interesting developments in the European Union. I know that there's a lot of things happening, and I know that there's an expectation of countries to report on issues far more than just issues related to financial matters, human rights issues, the ESG, environment, society, and governance issues. I know that's very prominent in the European Union, which will probably lead to the example for many other jurisdictions as well. The problem currently is the distinction between what information is useless, well, what's really misleading, what's the right information, and then you can go on: irrelevant, unimportant, unverified, future, pointless, etc., until you disappear in vaguity into over the horizon. So the problem is, where and how do we get to this point? Where can we ensure that the information that's been reported by the companies on non-financial issues are relevant, material, and reliable? What's the right information? And this is somewhat of a challenge. There's been a lot of organizations and associations and organizations and foundations who dealt with the problem. I'm not going to bore you with all the various initiatives to ensure reporting on non-financial information by all the organizations. you can, I mean, the abbreviations is just beyond me, all of it. I only know a few of them, but they all are there, I assure you, and I haven't done a comprehensive search. What's most exciting of all is in particular that SASB and the International Integrated Reporting Council. So SASB and the International Integrated Reporting Council, combined with some of the significant global reporting initiative, they started in 2020 to become serious about consolidation and harmonization. And they agreed to form the new Value Reporting Foundation, the VRF. And they are very far advanced. I just attended a seminar last week in really sorting out the various forms of reporting on non-financial information, incorporating the standards of SASB and the really excellent integrated reporting framework that's been developed by people like Mervyn King and several other very influential individuals in this space. And I really think it's absolutely wonderful. There's also an ongoing series of seminars to tell people what are the standards, the SASB standards, and I take it that in future it will focus on the standards promoted by both the combined standards, integrated reporting, and the SASB standards. There are subtle differences, but they've got broadly the same aim, and combined they form a absolutely wonderful way that I think will become the world standards within the next 3 years. Mark my words, as Michael Douglas said, it's already taken off tremendously since I told an audience 4 years ago, 5 years ago in Hong Kong that integrated reporting will become important, and we are here now, but I will predict it's going to be even more important for future purposes. And it will become legal requirements, and it will lead to potential liabilities for directors. It's just absolutely fantastic, in my view, the way in which the organizations start to try and simplify. The constant theme is simplification because it is massively complex. When I started doing research in this area in about 2015, I just couldn't get my head around sustainable reporting, integrated reporting, ESG, GRA, all these various things, complicated, unnecessary, because we strive all for the same aim, and that is to make companies responsible, looking after the long interests of the corporation, long-term interests of all the stakeholders in a corporation. And I think this is going to be a very important tool, non-financial reporting on non-financial information, a very powerful corporate governance tool. It's one of my short notes deals with that as well, that will ensure that investors are aware of the way in which companies achieve sustainability and act responsibly. And I have always said from the beginning, it should absolutely be linked to all the sustainable goals of the UN. The reporting, if you say there should be the sustainable developments and there are goals, you need to get information in a very harmonized and standardized way as to how you can judge whether the goals have been achieved. And in my view, the challenge now will be to integrated reporting, SASB, very closely with these sustainable development goals. I currently do not find a particular close alliance between the initiatives and the sustainable development goals, although nobody would deny that it is important. I think there should be a closer alliance as far as reporting are concerned. So very, very good intentions, great developments in that area. And it is indeed like the business initiative of the American Business Roundtable, Larry Finks's initiative, the purpose of the cooperation in this initiative by the British Academy. It is another initiative that I think is absolutely fantastic, and that we can just support it for future purposes. All this said, I want you to have a look at this image. I have bought this image. Well, others can buy it as well, so it's not violating any copyright issues. But have a look what's happening here. You've got a crowd there. That's us. You've got a person who's standing there, his attention is distracted, and then you've got somebody who's pickpocketing the person. The main thing is the distraction there. That's the most important thing. Can you see the person standing in front of the person who gets pickpocketed? That person is distracting him. He's asking a question. He's diverting the person's attention away from what's really happening, and then he's pickpocketing the person. It's the absolute skeptical hat that I'm putting on here when I say these initiatives and these intentions, are they distractions? How serious are they? As long as they haven't got any fundamentally legal bases in jurisdictions, if the shareholder primacy model is still based on the old cases and later case law, if the corporation is still defined, the best interest of the corporation as the best interest of the shareholders current and future, based on significant, in Australia, High Court cases, and there's no statutory provision that would say differently. And you look at a very vague, and in my view, a very fuzzy law, Section 172 of the UK Corporations Act, that would mention other stakeholders, but you can do and you can have regard to the interests of other stakeholders, as long as you do it in the best interest of the members. So it's the best or the most significant way in which shareholder primacy has embedded under a different banner, the so-called value-added shareholder primacy model. It's absolutely, in my view, just window dressing. It's a distraction. There's no real legal basis. You can have regard to it, but if you don't want to have regard to the other interests, you can ignore it. So my question to you, and this is where I ask you to be very critical. I'm very excited about the new developments, the messages by Larry Fink, by the American Roundtable, Business Roundtable, by the reporting of non-financial information. Very excited. But is that enough? Will this greed is good concept disappear? Will looking after the interests of other stakeholders, will it really become a serious matter, not just window dressing, not just a smoke screen, not just the facade? Will it become really significant with a legal basis? And that's what we need to work on. I've written an article with another colleague, Irene Marie Esser, in 2007. And I know one of the persons who's been instrumental in introducing this concept and our idea into the King report in South Africa. I've seen her name on the participants. And what we've said is the way in which we should see corporations is they are separate legal entities. And there are various stakeholders, and the interests of the various stakeholders vary. But within the company as a separate legal entity. So the directors do not owe their duties to individual shareholders. They do not owe their duties towards the environment or towards the workers or towards clients. They owe their duties towards the company as a separate legal entity. I could find no indication whatsoever in any statutory provision, in Australia at least, where it is said that in our Corporations Act, the definition of a corporation is different than just the corporation as a separate legal entity with the separate existence, separate from its shareholders, its clients, the environment. And the directors' duties are owed to the corporation. And that means that at times, the interests of some of the stakeholders can vary. The directors need to focus at times on the interests of the clients, on the community, and at a particular moment of time, as long as they consider it to be in the best interest of the corporation, they can take into consideration a different interest. They can prioritize. They should not always think that the best interest of the corporation is the best interest of the shareholders. At times, they may have better advantages given from the profits to the employees. The employees cannot insist on it, as long as the directors then argue that they would pay dividends in a particular year, that they would do share buybacks, because it is in the long-term best interest of the corporation. No salary increases, but they need to justify it, that it is, and the way in which they've acted is in the best interest of the corporation. And I think if you see the corporation in this way, which has always been the basis of corporate law for many, many centuries, from Solomon and Solomon, those of you familiar with UK company law, who really established the significance of the company as a separate legal entity, that is just as relevant as it was the end of the previous century and today. Far more relevant than the Milton Friedman approach to capitalism, which ignored to a large extent the impact of the corporation as a separate legal entity, that just focused on the best interest and profit maximization for one stakeholder, the shareholders. And I really think that if you combine broadly, this is just one initiative, this is the integrated reporting framework. They've been refined now that they've merged. If you combine this, then I think there would be hope legally, if you see it in that way, combined with a legal expectation of proper reporting on non-financial information, that we would get responsible corporations. There's most definitely serious dangers, and there's a large crack here. A more challenging, urgent and lasting solution, we need to find it. We need to think, this is what I mentioned to the younger generation in particular, a fundamental rethink and reform of our corporate law and corporate governance models, not only tinkering on the edges, not only running with initiatives. We need to change the law. That's been overdue long before COVID-19. Lynn Stott saw that, Margaret Blair saw that. I relied on their work later on to realize that we really need to make sure that we strive for change. The COVID-19 exposed the large cracks in the current shareholder primacy model as basis of our corporate law and corporate governance model. And we need to consider the concept of shareholder capitalism, and the more acceptable term, as far as Mervyn King is concerned, inclusive capitalism, and I agree with him. We need to think about this very carefully. If we do not find about this carefully, we will run into trouble. Finally, before I stop, the limited liability company, of course, as I said, a great, absolutely wonderful invention. The all-inclusive stakeholder theory of corporate law needs to be developed further. and the reporting on disclosure of non-financial information, absolutely vital. If we, perhaps it's too late already, but if we do not start again to think about this, we may very well be sitting around that campfire, if there could be a campfire on this planet Earth. I really hope, irrespective of the interruptions, that at least I gave you some food for thought, that you would try fishing in some of the deeper pools and waters to find out where the hidden fishes are, and try to catch them and provide solutions for the future. So on that note, I once again apologize for interruptions. I'm very happy to take some questions, and please express your views. That's one of the main things. You may disagree with me very strongly. Please say so.
Thank you very much, Jean, for this very interesting and intriguing presentation, which has given us a lot of food for thought, I think. Thank you very much. So I would have a lot of questions on that, but it's not supposed to be a discussion between us. So who would like to go ahead and ask a question or comment on the presentation? Please feel just free to either raise your hand via the tool or write something in the chat if you feel more comfortable with that. But as we are only 30 participants, I think it would be really nice if you could just ask a question via audio, if there are any.
And please, any comments, welcome as well. As I said, I really know how complex this area is. I know how controversial it is. I know that many of my views are massively controversial. And if I have defended my views in front of really arrogant, aggressive CEOs, not many, but I know they've really given me a very hard time. But if you stick to the basic principles, at least, I think that I could answer, at least defend my point of view. Okay, well, so if you've got different views, yep.
Sorry, if I have now one question on the chat. Could you give any examples of inclusive capital, please?
Well, I mean inclusive capitalism. So what I mean by that is basically my model that I've explained to you on the last slides. So it is the model that you make sure that directors start to focus on the various interests represented within the company. So it's inclusively of all the various stakeholders, but depending on what is in the best interest of the corporation. And in this way, it's inclusive, and it is still based on the idea that we've got capitalism, that companies are there to make profits, but not only profits for the shareholders or for the stockholders. Profits for the corporation as a separate legal entity, and that will eventually lead to the increase of to the benefits of all the other stakeholders. But there's a disproportionate, I'm not saying the other stakeholders have not benefited from the Milton Friedman model. Please do not understand me. They have, but it's absolutely disproportionate to the value that the stakeholders got. If I may, just a second, there is a book, Grow the Pie, which has been published end of last year. I originally was very excited about it, and if you read the introductory parts, it raves about this, not cutting the pie, but growing the pie. But when I really studied the book in detail, I was sort of really disappointed. I don't think there's anything significantly new, nothing different from what I've argued or what Lynn Stott or Margaret Blair argued. It's just a different banner that you put over the whole old thing that, well, stakeholders are important. I don't think it's really quite unique. I don't personally think that the debate of the British Academy on the purpose of the corporation is new. If you read the articles in the 1930s, all these issues were discussed. It's got a new name now, the purpose of the corporation, the future, but I cannot find anything significantly new. But the inclusiveness, to get back to your question, of the capitalism is embedded in this model of the company as a separate legal entity, creating wealth. That can be its main aim, but taking into consideration the long-term interest of the corporation, and then by doing that, at times consider the various interests of the individual interests, depending on whether it is in the best interest of the corporation. That is what I mean by inclusive capitalism, not capitalism focused only on greed is good and profit maximization for the shareholders. That's wrong in my view.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's another question in the chat from Richard Foster, and he asks, maybe I just read it, need to align this with modified shareholder approach, that is ESG investment lens, for this to work.
You've broken up slightly. Could you just repeat it slightly slower? Because
I'm sorry. Need to align this with modified shareholder approach, that is ESG investment lens, for this to work.
Yes, Richard, hi, by the way. I've seen that you've attended. Richard and I come a very long way. He was one of my corporate governance students originally in South Africa, and has been very successful in his career. In any way, Richard, yes, absolutely. The alignment should be there. The whole concept of responsible investment, and there are guidelines for responsible investment. The whole concept of ESG, absolutely important. You would probably know, and as other people in South Africa, that the South African model has been aligned towards an all-inclusive approach since 1994. And it's been aligned with not the single bottom line reporting, but reporting the triple bottom line on all these issues. I think that we've moved one step further now, and I think Mervyn will appreciate this, with the refinement of integrated reporting and now the SASB standards. So I think that you need to expand. ESG has got a slightly wider and more refined meaning. And I think that's what's going to form the basis of future expectations and probably the basis of future legislation. And I know people say, and I am with everybody who would say that we should not over-regulate. Just as much as I am against over-regulation, as much am I against the whole idea of business initiatives with no real meaning. Soft law can take things up to a point, but thereafter you need to have the hard law kick in. And I'm really, whereas 10 years ago, I would have argued fiercely no more regulations and only for soft law. I've reached the stage, and now it's been exposed by COVID-19, that no, it's not going to help. It's not going to work. People, the greed factor kicked in too much, and you need to do something drastic to adhere or address the problem. So yes, Richard, to get back to your question, there should be alignment, and the alignment should be based around ESG, combined with the concepts and the 6 different capitals on which you need to report. And that will automatically, to use, I don't like the term growing the pie. I don't like the title of the book, but that's irrelevant. This is a personal view. I really think that we can increase the value creation of corporations in the best interests of all the stakeholders and the society included, and for long-term sustainability by taking into account all these important issues related to non-financial issues. And there I want to get back to my point of the sustainable goals. We need to bring the worlds together. There are the goals, here's the reporting, here's what responsible the responsible investment is, and how do responsible investors determine whether companies are responsible? Reliability, materiality, and whether there will be consequences if you don't report correctly.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have 3 more questions in the chat, but it seems we're running a little bit out of time. So I'm gonna take the freedom to pick one, and maybe I will send you the chat and you can answer the others directly.
I can most definitely send me you can send me the details, my email address, jjdp, or just Google me under Jean du Plessis Deakin University, and then you can ask questions to me directly. I really invite anybody who's attending at the moment. If you have any specific queries, there's no time, please send me an email. I normally respond to all queries. If I think it's getting too time consuming, I'll tell you, but don't hesitate to contact me directly. You can. So please, Professor Schmidt, ask the last question there.
Okay, so I'm just picking one which I think may be a short question. There is Nadine Albrecht who is asking, since shareholder and stakeholder theories both go into very extreme positions, would it, for example, be good to use the good pastor model of corporate responsibility as a good extension, or would you not consider this a good alternative?
We get into the vagueness and vagaries of, once again, the term corporate social responsibilities, the caretaking mode of corporations. I don't think corporations' main aim should become corporate social responsibility. It can't be the main aim. That would be ridiculous. Then you can go to the model of benefit corporations only. That's not the idea. The idea is still that within the broad aim of creating wealth, having advantages and creating advantages and wealth for all the stakeholders, you need to focus on how that could be achieved by the corporation or the company as a separate legal entity, not ignoring these other interests, but ultimately to benefit all of them, including the society, including economies of the country. You can't just put everything back into the stakeholders and not pay any taxes. Well, let us not get into that area, because you know there are huge issues, companies, large companies shifting profits, not paying what they should pay in particular countries. Let's not get into that. But what I'm clearly not in favor of, I don't want to get all companies to be benefit corporations. I don't think that's right. I think companies should have, as part of their as part of striving for the best interest of the corporation, to create wealth for the stakeholders, and in the same time, or at the same time, let the economy of a country grow. Give the advantages for the stakeholders and the countries, but not only a disproportionate part of the benefits to the shareholders. So this caretaking mode of corporations, looking always, if the society would say, no, you're treating us completely unfairly, and they haven't got real grounds to say, well, the directors would take a decision that they're not going to expand their budget for corporate social responsibilities in a particular year, because there are other interests that's more long-term and in the best interest of the corporation, that would eventually also benefit the society or the community, rather, in which the company operates. They should have the right to take that decision to prioritize the interests of various stakeholders. One cannot be dominant. And that's why my animation on the previous slide, the stakeholders moving around, but always within context of the best interests of the corporation. That would be my approach.
Okay, thank you very much for these insights. And I think we could discuss about this for maybe 2 hours longer, but unfortunately our time's running out. Maybe this could be a good opportunity to invite you for another talk in the future, that we will be very happy to have you again here with us. So for everybody else, thank you very much for attending today. As Professor Jean-Luc Plessis kindly offered, if you have any more questions, you just maybe drop him an email, and I think he'll be happy to answer. And again, thank you very much for attending today. Have a nice morning, afternoon, or night, or wherever you are. It's been a pleasure having you here today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. And enjoy the summer there. It's quite cold here.
And thank you very much, Jean, for this wonderful talk today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Maybe you could stay in the line for a few more seconds.
Yeah, that would be great. So if everybody leaves, we'll have a chat. Thank you.